let's get back to the lecture. So what we're going to do in the next part is we're going to cover something that you're already fairly familiar with, and that's the 4 P's, which stand for, what do they stand for? Do you remember? What were the 4 P's? Price?
Place.
Yeah, right. Price, product, place, and promotion. So we're going to start with promotion because I just want to touch on it very briefly. The promotional mix is made up of 5 different elements, and that's usually the advertising, the selling, the direct marketing, the sales promotions, and the public relations. So all of these aspects refer to the way that you are communicating with the market, whether you're talking about the way that the product is advertised, or whether you're talking about calling someone on the phone and trying to make a direct sale, or whether you're talking about putting out announcements in the media or conducting public relations. You're talking about promotion. Now the place is something that I'll also cover very briefly. This is why I put it at the beginning, because I want to focus on the product and the price. So in terms of place, of course, you have to choose, if you have a business that is physically located somewhere, you have to choose the right or the best possible location. But it is likely in the current climate that your business might be actually international, or it might have a strong online component. So you want to consider the different channels that you are using to, for instance, promote the product. Is it social media? Is it paid ads? How are you promoting the product to start with? You want to consider the coverage, so which parts of the market, which parts of the country, which parts of the world are you covering? You want to consider the location of your business. Do you have a physical store? Where is it located? Even if it's within a city, if it's within Beijing here, which part of Beijing? What is the best physical location for you? When you talk about the inventory, what types of products do you have in stock? Where are you storing them? Are you keeping track of how they're being stored? Who's in charge of the inventory? And of course, transport. How do the products, if you have physical products, get delivered? How do you send them off to the customers, or are you selling them directly, etc.? In any case, the place is the second key component of the 4. Now the third one is the product, and what I'm going to focus on is primarily the product life cycle here for a couple of minutes. So you have this curve that I'm sure you've seen in your business textbooks. So you have 4 stages of the product life cycle: introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. Now keep in mind that this is a theoretical model, so not all products move exactly in this way on the curve, but it's something that is useful to keep in mind because it helps you recognize certain processes that are taking place if you're managing a business, and it helps you understand what's happening sometimes to your products. So starting with the introduction, first of all, there is a high product failure rate in the introduction period because it might just never pick up. Or even if it picks up a little and then goes back down, you might have to readjust the product, you might have to rework it. So the introduction is kind of the most unstable out of these 4. You do have relatively little competition usually if you have an innovative product, but your distribution channels tend to be fairly limited. If you're collecting response from the market, which you would hopefully be doing, you would be modifying the product very frequently so you can suit it, you can tailor it better to the market, and it can get into the growth stage in the future. And there might be some losses in the introduction phase, obviously, because your sales are fairly low at this stage still. When you move on to the growth stage, everything starts to change. So first of all, you tend to have a lot more competitors. If you're targeting a wider market, first of all, there were companies that were already selling to the market. Even if it's not this product, they were selling different products, and they were taking up some of the expenses that these consumers make. Or even if it was a new product, there might be different companies that saw what you did and are also trying to enter the market now. There is usually less product distinctiveness in the growth stage, partly for these reasons, but there are fairly profitable returns, especially when compared to the introduction period because of the increase in sales. In some cases, you might have larger companies acquiring your company if you're the smaller one, or if you're a large company, you might look for younger companies that are in the growth phase, and you might want to attempt to acquire them. So when you reach the maturity stage, sales usually continue to increase for a while, but at a very reduced rate, and the product line may be widened, prices tend to fall as competitiveness increases, or they tend to stay stable, and profits tend to fall because of the so-called double whammy. So on one side you have the price that might be falling or staying stable, and on the other you need to push this promotion and maintain this brand reputation or awareness or this level of advertising to promote the product. At this stage, if you have marginal producers, they might drop out of the industry and open up and basically leave that product to other producers. And in the final stage, when you reach the declining stage, obviously you have falling sales for the total industry, usually as many companies as there are in that industry or that market. Price cutting may intensify as they're trying to sell units that are already manufactured, for example, and many producers might decide to abandon the market and move on to the next big thing as that product seems to be on its way out. Now, this framework is something that you should use as a rough guide, but not as a Bible. It's not something that you should follow literally because it has pros and cons. So the pros are that if you're aware of different stages, you can adopt different strategies in the ways that you are conducting your business or managing your company, and you can adapt more appropriately to them. And you can also prepare your management for changes of strategy. Management is usually fairly difficult to basically tweak because it has inertia usually, and people that work in management are used to certain ways of doing things, so it's not always easy to get them to change the way that they think about the market and the world. Now, in this section you also have 3 cons that we've listed. So the time span of the curve varies enormously and varies differently for each different product. So you might actually risk, if you're following it, to prematurely end the life of a product. Because, for instance, if you're expecting to get into a decline period, then you might actually be looking actively for signs of a decline. And the moment you see something small, you might misinterpret it and wrongly adjust your strategy, whereas you still had some opportunity for more profit in the maturity stage. Now, the curve is also not always a curve. Variations do exist. Sometimes you might have a launch of a product that's very successful and then it starts to drop. If it's a product that is communicated well, marketed well, or if it's something that there already is sufficient demand for, a product might actually start high or soar up very rapidly and then decline. It might decline gradually, or it might decline rather suddenly. So the product lifecycle framework is something that you should use, again, as a rough guide to identify different phases, but not as something that should be followed literally. Now, when you flip this type of product lifecycle from the consumer's perspective, you have different phases that consumers go through. So you have raising awareness for the consumers. So first of all, you tell them, what is this product, what does it do, why is it good for them? Is this something that they don't know about? Why should they know about it, etc. Then you raise their interest, then they evaluate the product, then they try it out, maybe they start buying it, and then they decide whether to adopt it or reject it. So for instance, especially with social media, with online reviews, it's very easy to build either a good or a bad name, or at least relatively easier than it was before. and it kind of multiplies that effect enormously. Now, the different types of consumers that adopt your product at different stages have these rather funky names in business textbooks. So the early adopters are called innovators, and they usually might be, for instance, if it's technology, fans of technology who usually like to try out the latest products. It's kind of a hobby for them. Then you have the early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards, who are the last ones to adopt the product. I realize that these numbers don't exactly add up to 100, but it should illustrate the point well enough. So when you think of a company, if you are presenting your company, there are at least two ways to think about it. And I encourage you, of course, to consider the second column here, which has benefit-oriented definitions in it. So if you think of, for instance, Lancome, what is the product that they're selling? Well, they sell cosmetics, right? This is the literal definition of what they do. But what is the benefit for the people that are buying it? Well, we sell beauty, right? We sell ways for you to look more beautiful, or to look perhaps younger, or to look perhaps in a certain way that you're aspiring to look, because, for instance, there are famous people that look like this, or there's some sort of social pressure, or whatever it may be, or perhaps because it's simply something that you like. And then you have Xerox. What do? They make photocopiers. They actually actually signed a very big deal with Fujifilm. I think it was 1 or 2 days ago, so it might be worth reading about in the news. It's been all over the headlines. But anyway, so what do? They make photocopiers. But what can they tell the consumer in terms of a value proposition? We improve office productivity, right? So it's not just a matter of a machine input-output, it's a matter of changing the productivity in the office and improving it. When you think about Disney, what do? They make films and associated products. But what is the value for you? Well, they entertain you. They provide you with an opportunity to escape from the world of whatever it is. Working part-time, or doing homework, or sitting in a class that you're not interested in. And then you can go and watch a movie, or you can go to a Disney park, and then you can feel happy about life. Even if you think about your own university, what do? We teach you a wide range of skills and frameworks. Sure, this is technically true and literally what we do, but what do we want to project to you and to the world and to your parents and to the community? We project that we prepare you for the outside world, which of course is true, but it's also a benefit-oriented definition of what we do here. So whenever you are presenting your product and presenting your value proposition, focus on the benefit-oriented definition. What is it for the consumer that is valuable in this product or in this service? Now, I wanted to mention briefly also the Boston Consulting Group matrix. So essentially what they did, that's also popular in all sorts of textbooks, what they did was they identified 4 types of product: stars, question marks, cash cows, and dogs. And essentially the stars are the ones with high market growth rate and high relative market share. Then you have the opposite of the stars is the dogs, low market growth rate and low relative market share. And then you have the 2 that are basically in the middle. So you have question marks that have a high market growth rate but low relative market share. And you also have the cash cows with low market growth rate but high relative market share that are essentially primarily making cash. So this is something also that you should keep in mind when you're identifying and evaluating different types of products. Now, finally, out of the 4 Ps, so we spent some time talking about the product. Finally, I want to move on to the price element. So when you're thinking about price, you should consider how sensitive consumers are to price. So when you change the price a little bit, do consumers get bothered a lot by this, or do they get bothered a little, or do they not notice at all? So consumers are usually less price sensitive when the product is unique. So if there is no alternatives on the market, it doesn't matter how much it costs, they still have to buy it if they want it, because it's the only option they have. When comparisons are difficult to make, so that also emphasizes uniqueness in a way. When the cost of the product is low relative to total expenditure, so if somebody is spending, say, let's say $2,000 a month, and your product costs 50 cents, or it costs $1, well, that's not a big percentage of their income. So whether it costs 50 cents or $1, that might not be that much of a big deal to them. When the product is perceived to be of high value, or when it's perceived to be prestigious, customers are also less price sensitive, because they're walking into the store or they're going onto the shopping website with the idea that they will be spending a considerable amount of money and that they will receive something that's of high value or something prestigious. And when the product finally is required for assets previously bought. So there are cases where consumers are not that much affected by price, but in many cases they actually are. And before marketing, if you think about the early economists that we started talking about at the beginning of the lecture, for a long period of time, all of the classical economists were thinking of demand and price as things that are almost directly related. So the price is a key factor to think about when you are marketing a product. So the range of the pricing decision is usually limited by two things. At the lower level, it's limited by the costs of the product. So for instance, that might be the production cost, the shipping cost. You can't sell it for less than you paid for it. So this is the lower limit of the price. And the upper limit of the price is usually determined by demand, excluding the random outlier that you might have who might actually be willing to pay a lot of money for one item. The average amount of demand where people are actually paying, where people are actually in sufficient numbers to make the business operational, this is what you should consider when you're forming the price. Now, to increase pricing discretion, you can do two things. You can either increase perceived benefits and hence increase demand. So you can either convince people that this product is even better or even more useful than they thought it was, so you can increase demand, and then the brand here increases. Or you can lower the production cost, and then you can keep the same price but get a different profit margin with the added lower production cost. Now, two popular pricing strategies are skimming and penetration. So skimming is what we spoke about in one of the earlier discussions, and it's something that a lot of companies do. For instance, in technology, every time a new type of technology product is launched, for instance, when Samsung launched this phone with the two screens, the double screen phones, earlier in the year, the price was very high, and they were essentially trying to skim the market to get the most amount of money from the people who would buy it anyway. So you're trying to get the most money from early adopters, and then you're probably going to reduce the price progressively. And the second strategy is penetration. So that's kind of the opposite. You're trying to get as large a portion of the market as possible. So you don't want to price it very highly. You want to price it competitively as opposed to other products. So when you're moving prices, when you're raising the price or you're decreasing the price, consider that a small increase or decrease in the price actually has a significant impact on the operating profit that your company is registering. And this is what we know as operating leverage. And here is how it works. So let's imagine that these are the costs involved in running the company, and these are the products that you're selling. This is your margin, this is your revenue, the cost of goods sold, etc. Essentially, what these columns are telling you is that everything stays static except for these three columns here. So first of all, if you increase the revenue, let's imagine you increase the revenue from 100, whatever it might be, dollars, renminbi, doesn't matter, from 100 to 101, what happens is the margin increases by 1 point here, okay? So it looks like it might be insignificant in the big picture unless you're looking at the profit, because, well, the revenue moves from 1 to 101, well, that's a 1% increase in revenue. However, 90 points of this revenue, 90% of this revenue is going for all sorts of operational costs, and the actual profit here at the end of the day was $10 in the first case. So now from $10, because this dollar is coming on top with no extra costs, from $10 profit, now you have $11 profit, which is actually a 10% increase in the profit. So sometimes a 1% increase in the price can lead to a 10% increase in profit, or 5%, or whatever it may be when you work the numbers out. But the point is that small increases or decreases in price have substantial implications for businesses, especially when you have a lot of operational costs, transport costs, etc. involved. Now there are other companies that affect pricing. So you have, for instance, company and marketing objectives. So you have considerations of the target market and the brand image. So if you're aiming at the mass market, you can't price it too highly. If you're aiming at keeping a kind of a high-end luxury brand image, then you want to set a high price because you want the customers to feel like they are getting something valuable. You have all sorts of consideration here. So the point is that forming the price is a complex process. You need to look at the market. You need to look at other firms. You need to look at competition. You need to look at legislation. You need to look at social and political pressure. And the point is that you have to take all of these into consideration. And at the same time, you should pay attention to how much the actual profit is and whether operating the business is sustainable in the long term with this amount of profit.